Hello and welcome to The Money Movement. We are recording here at Consensus 22 in Austin, Texas. 17,000 people, amazing people getting together. I guess I can sort of say post-pandemic. I'm not sure what that means, but happy to have that, and very happy to have Dan Held with Kraken, one of the most thoughtful writers, thinkers, and I think people working in the Bitcoin space, crypto broadly, but you've been incredibly outspoken in Bitcoin. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely, yeah. But there's a ton we could talk about, obviously, and maybe if you're okay, just doing a little bit of an origin story for the listeners, just like your journey down the rabbit hole, just kind of when, where, how, and we're going to zoom around a little bit from there.
Sounds good. Yeah. So I was in school during the 2008 financial crisis, studying finance in undergrad, and I realized that the books that I was reading were wrong, the professors were wrong, and everyone on TV was wrong. And so I started to question the nature of my reality a little bit. Do the institutions and leaders in charge of our financial system actually know what they're doing? And so I was already disillusioned with our leadership in the financial system. A couple of years later, I discovered Bitcoin. And I'm not going to say I got it right away. I don't think anyone does. I think it takes a while to really dig in. I mean, I'm still learning things about Bitcoin, I didn't know. And so I started to read about Bitcoin, and I learned about the monetary policy, the 21 million hard cap. Mm-hmm. And to me, that was a brilliant breakthrough. It demonstrated that you could build a monetary policy where you never have inflation, and that inflation is always a source of political turmoil, where we could debate on if 2% or 5% is the appropriate rate of inflation. So it constantly opens up the money to an attack vector of politics. So I thought that was brilliant. And then also Silk Road was, I think, a testament to Bitcoin's resiliency. I didn't know how Bitcoin worked on a proof of work level, like how Bitcoin mining worked or how the network worked. But I was like, if people can buy things that are illegal, it's probably doing something right. It's got the immutable characteristic to it. So
it's a bearer instrument, right?
Exactly. So it was a demonstration that it was immutable or censorship resistant, which was really cool. And then, so I started buying in 2012, and then, and I didn't have a ton of money. I was like 24, I definitely wish I was 10 years older where I had a little bit more discretionary income. And then I moved to San Francisco. I worked at a small firm in Dallas, and they moved me out to San Francisco. And there I got involved in the Bitcoin meetup scene. So this was Jared Kenna, Jesse Powell from Kraken, Brian and Fred. Did you ever go to one of those?
I came out to a couple of events out there, and who was it who had the house where
Jeremy Gardner.
Yes, Jeremy Gardner.
The Crypto Castle.
The Crypto Castle.
Yeah.
And there were I don't know, several of these startups were all basically there. Yeah.
Totally. I mean, you had 20 Mission, you had Crypto Castle.
Yeah.
And these were communities that were built around different crypto assets. Yeah. And it was funny because January 2013, there was only a dozen people. In fact, if you go to the meetup invite and go back and scroll, mm-hmm. you can see that there's only a dozen people that RSVP'd. Mm-hmm. And then March 2013 hit, and there's this huge bubble from Bitcoin went from $10 to $260.
Yeah.
And there's a huge wave of excitement. VCs were literally handing out business cards. I remember Lightspeed was there, and they were literally handing out business cards. There's 150 people at the meetup, and that's the moment when I decided to build my first product. Zero Block. I don't know if you remember Zero
Absolutely.
Block.
Yeah.
It was, for folks who are watching, it was one of the most popular mobile apps back in 2013.
Yeah.
Which back in that day, you didn't really have to build something sophisticated because there weren't that many people building products.
Yeah.
So it was very basic. It was a price tracker product, and that got bought by blockchain.com. And so that kickstarted my career in tech. So built some early products in crypto, worked at a couple other crypto companies to zoom forward a little bit. And then my last company I created was called Interchange, and we got bought by Kraken.
Yeah.
And then at Kraken, I built out the embryo or the origins of the marketing organization, and then later on led the growth marketing team.
You've been in it all along, every facet. Yeah, no, I mean, I kind of discovered Bitcoin in 2012, and it did take me a little while, but it's actually very interesting because I found I had originally studied political economy when it got into a tech career, building internet platforms, other things. And then after the financial crisis, I similarly was like, what the fuck is going on here?
Totally.
I was just and I started to become an armchair monetary historian, right? So this was in 2009, 2010, where I was just finding these were the books I wanted to read.
Yeah.
History of money, central banking, like just learning more about the international monetary system, these other things. And I was, convinced like there had to be some kind of change on a global scale. There had to be, but it was unclear what that would be. And so I then finally got interested. But no, it's fascinating actually. Thinking back to the early 2013 days, there were projects, right? Like Counterparty was one, which was back then, which was actually like I believe one of the first potential mechanisms to do like what would be like smart contracts or tokens or other things.
And you remember colored coins.
And colored coins very much as well. And in the early white papers, if you want to call them that, for Circle, we were very focused on the ability to issue assets on top of Bitcoin. And really, my background was originally in working on like web programming languages, and eventually worked on different types of virtual machines and infrastructure, and so I was really intrigued by the idea of expanding script to do more. And so back in early 2013, these were like people were kind of talking about these ideas, and we just assumed that's going to happen, right? That you're going to be able to do that, and once you're going to be able to do that, you're going to be able to build layers of protocols, and you're going to be able to do things like abstract away existing assets and put them on these networks. And
there was more of a builder mindset in Bitcoin back then. Everyone was building their own either CeFi or like DeFi sort of application, or wanting to experiment with colored coins. And people forget that the first NFTs were on Bitcoin.
Yes.
On Counterparty, Rare Pepes.
Yeah, exactly.
So the early Bitcoin community was very oriented around experimentation and building.
And it was it was fascinating because I think like there's a lot to think about here. I mean, there was obviously this period of time when there was a focus on just like keeping Bitcoin what Bitcoin is, like don't try and have it be something else.
There was the cultural elements around Bitcoin that were developed somewhat later.
Yeah.
Like Saifedean's book, The Bitcoin Standard, and the meat culture and stuff.
Right.
And back in 2013, there wasn't any of that cultural stuff.
Yeah, no. And it was interesting to see just also the politics is the wrong word, but like, the core devs and who's really, who's really in control of the GitHub repos, and, and these expressions of ideology through, remember, I don't know if was it what the BIP was, but it was essentially like a merchant payment protocol, and like BitPay had contributed that. Yeah. And Gavin Andreessen as well. It was in the Bitcoin.org release. It was like a standard for how you do like a merchant payment. And, but that was ultimately like discarded basically. And there was a sense of like, no, we're not going to stuff all this stuff into Bitcoin. We need to keep Bitcoin simple.
Which in retrospect, I think they were right.
Yeah.
When it comes to a lot of the decision making, this is a rocket ship, right? The Bitcoin protocol is like a rocket ship. And if you make an error and it breaks, it's like a rocket having, there's a 0.01% error that could lead to a catastrophic failure. The rocket explodes.
Right.
And so Bitcoin, on its trajectory as a new money, has made its way to the atmosphere. So we passed the hardest test so far. We made it out of the atmosphere, and we're on our way. We already went past the moon. We're at $30,000 of Bitcoin. I think when you and I first got into it, $30,000 of Bitcoin is unfathomable. Yeah, that we would have achieved that, or it would have been that successful. I mean, this conference has more people than the entire crypto ecosystem had 5 years ago, in terms of like how many people like were working in the crypto industry. So, with that analogy, we've already gone past the moon and we're on our way to Mars, and so that's an incredibly delicate period of a new crypto protocol to go through that period. Yeah, and so. The core devs, I kind of see them, they're tinkering on the rocket as it's going, right? And you have to make very, very careful decisions. And in retrospect, it made sense. If you try to jam all these things into Bitcoin, you have to trade off something. Yeah. And the trade-off usually is censorship resistance or decentralization to some degree. Yeah. My kind of simple analogy for Bitcoin versus Ethereum, or Bitcoin versus other protocols, is Bitcoin rejects all the fun, cool stuff to just be as decentralized and as good of a money as possible. But these other we don't know what the appropriate level of decentralization is.
Yeah.
Until there's like a nation state attack moment, right? Or there's
I mean that's the threshold, right? Is the nation state attack vector. And
so
what
Bitcoin,
is that?
Bitcoiners are like, well, we're going to optimize everything for that event.
Yeah.
Bitcoiners could be wrong. And this is where I like to look at my own beliefs and try to pull them apart sometimes, where we could have over optimized for security.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe at the end of the day, don't ever attack these protocols to that degree. But I do believe that their hypothesis is likely correct, that eventually money starts to challenge the legitimacy of the state. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, you have to have a money as decentralized as possible. But yeah, the devs, I think, rightfully rejected some of these things you could do on top of Bitcoin because it would introduce a lot of change. And that change leads to risk, and that risk could have the rocket blow up.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. And so I think it's, clearly these were good decisions for preserving that. And it's obviously, created opportunities for other protocols, and there's been huge advancements and developments and other things that have been made possible. And so it's a vibrant space. It's an exciting space, but, kind of coming back to sort of building on Bitcoin, right? This sort of thesis, where in some ways there was a lot of experimentation with that, and then it kind of attention got diverted, and mm-hmm. It was all about building on Ethereum or whatever. But it seems like there's more attention coming back to building on Bitcoin, and I think it's because as the underlying decentralization, the underlying consensus model, the underlying fundamental security assurances mm-hmm. that you have from Bitcoin are just phenomenal, right? So absolutely. I mean, like that's there, and so you can't shake a stick at that.
If you've got the stable foundation, you want to build on something like that.
So now it's like, okay, like you said, it's kind of achieved a certain thing, and now it's like, okay, how do you carefully do that? So obviously there've been many years in development, kind of incremental primitives that have been mm-hmm. added, like Taproot, which is a significant one, and we're now starting to see people trying to build on that to start unlocking new things. But it's very gradual. But I mean, maybe just talk a little bit in your mind about the building on Bitcoin thesis today.
Yeah, I think building on Bitcoin or Bitcoin DeFi will be, right now, if you were to look at like Google search trends, it probably is barely a blip. Mm-hmm. But with crypto, our job is to predict what might happen. Our businesses depend on that.
Yeah.
And I do think Bitcoin DeFi could be one of the really powerful narratives and kind of new, we have a whole sweeping thing of NFTs or DeFi.
Yeah.
And I think Bitcoin DeFi could be an entirely new movement where mm-hmm. a lot of that excitement around DeFi comes back to Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. So going back to the Bitcoin's lineage as having primitive DeFi, it had rare pepes.
Yeah.
It also had, people forget about join market.
Yeah.
Join market is a way to earn yield on your Bitcoin in a trustless manner.
Mm-hmm.
You mix your coins with someone else, and they pay for that privilege as a maker of liquidity.
Yeah.
And so that's existed on Bitcoin for 7 years. But people don't think about this stuff, or the interfaces are really hard to use. I think with the right amount of attention, and through there's sort of a when you build on top of Bitcoin, you don't have all the cool stuff that some of these other protocols have. So you have to be a little bit more precise. So there's like Lightning, for example, I would consider a smart contract or or DeFi. I would consider Lightning to be DeFi. Mm-hmm. And also with Taro on Lightning, they're introducing stablecoins, which is really cool.
Yeah, they issue a token mm-hmm. and transact it.
Which is really cool too, because you're not transacting on the Bitcoin base layer.
Yeah.
So you're not subjected to that fee pressure that occurs mm-hmm. during when demand for block space increases dramatically. Do you really want to spend $100 to move an image, to move a JPEG, or to move another type of asset?
It is a really interesting paradigm shift, right? In that, right, the collateralization that's needed for these channels on Lightning, if it's collateralization that's really associated with kind of paying the cost of the underlying Bitcoin transactions that are carrying this huge number of like tokens that are could be USDC or could mm-hmm. be whatever. It changes the kind of adoption paradigm even of Lightning itself. But we're really excited about that. I think we're really excited about the potential of USDC for Bitcoin, and I think just looking at these technological developments, a lot of things are actually coming together to make some of these things possible.
Bitcoin moves a little slower. The other protocols make lots of changes very quickly to allow you to do the fun, cool stuff. The Bitcoin engineers on the rocket like to make little changes.
Mm-hmm.
So over a long period of time, we can start to do more of those cool things. It just has to be done in a very, very precise manner.
Mm-hmm.
That's where like the Lightning being developed and adopted,
mm-hmm.
I think has been a huge win for Bitcoin DeFi. You've also got like RSK. RSK has been around a long time, but they never got developer interest though.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where Lightning kind of stands apart from like RSK. They've gotten developer interest.
Mm-hmm.
Same with like Stacks, I think.
Yeah.
I think Stacks as well has gotten developer interest and people excited, and
mm-hmm.
they have a community. Of course, they have a token too, which depending on how Bitcoiner you are or not, some people don't like that and some people do like that.
Yeah.
I think I'm more of a Bitcoin moderate these days, where I love Bitcoin. That's why I'm here. That's my mission. It's the success of Bitcoin, I think, is paramount for our freedom. And so that's something I want to work the rest of my life on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to people building these projects, some of them aren't necessarily trying to be money.
Mm-hmm.
They're more of crypto equity. And so these tokens are an alignment of incentives.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, it's a different kind of digital commodity. And it
totally.
I mean, look, I there's a huge spectrum of tokenized mechanisms, and it's a new creative surface, new creative tool that we have for organizing a lot of things. And so I think they're not all, every digital token is not trying to be a reserve currency.
Right.
Right.
And that's where the Bitcoiners, I think, get a little bit too intense with that, where it's like, no, they're not competing with Bitcoin.
Right.
They're trying to do crypto equity in a way, like tokens to represent ownership in like an enterprise, like DAOs and stuff like that, which I think is a really interesting thing. And DAOs, by the way, were written about on Bitcoin Talk. Did you ever go on Bitcoin Talk?
Absolutely, yeah.
People forget that, Twitter is where the conversation happens now, or Discord.
Yeah, no, it was all Bitcoin Talk.
It's all Bitcoin Talk.
And Reddit for a while as well, yeah.
There's like the Bitcoin Talk era, and then we had the Reddit era, and then Twitter.
Yeah.
And I actually like Twitter the most because it's more open.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of conversations that can happen.
Yeah.
It's
better UX.
Yeah, it's a lot better UX than Bitcoin Talk.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting to see, DAOs. I read about those for the first time on Bitcoin Talk, where they were like, you could build they were thinking fully autonomous corporation.
Right.
Which was a pretty cool idea.
Right.
So, I like that spirit of what like the other crypto projects are doing, because they're all, I think, very excited to like look at how tokens can align incentives. And so that's where I'm more of a moderate, Bitcoin moderate, where I'm like, for example, if Stacks wants to use tokens to align incentives and build on top of Bitcoin while also having their own version of a gas token, let's see how the experiment plays out. So yeah, with Bitcoin DeFi, I think like Stacks and Lightning probably had the two biggest developer communities and also interest. You've got other stuff like DLCs, which is cool too.
Yeah.
Discrete log contracts where Atomic Finance is building Bitcoin options using DLCs. So that's pretty cool. That level of sophistication is really interesting. But Bitcoin's never going to have like the composability of Ethereum or Solana. But it can do. I think when we think about DeFi, we're product guys. So like when we build a product, we solve a problem for a certain niche. And if we look at DeFi, there's only so many activities that people do. Typically, right? You're typically like collateralized lending or borrowing, where I'm borrowing dollars against my ETH, and I post 100K in ETH, and I borrow 50K in USD or USDC. So, if we can take some of those use cases of DeFi that are most popular and bring those to Bitcoin, Bitcoin doesn't necessarily have to do everything these other protocols can do. If it just value captures the highest use, the most popular DeFi use cases, I think that's a pretty good start.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ability to borrow and lend and have also fiat pegged assets, and to have borrowing and lending on underlying Bitcoin native assets, and have decentralized exchange that works entirely on like native to the Bitcoin architecture. All of those are, I think, really compelling.
Yeah, and I mean, not to focus too much on Circle, but I think Circle is in a really cool spot with USDC. Stable coins represent a huge portion of crypto economic activity.
Yeah.
And I'd say, there's a lot of Bitcoiners like Nick Carter, Alex Gladstein, who love stablecoins because it not only helps out people in different countries that don't have access to a financial system, but you know what? I think sometimes Bitcoin's too big of a leap for people to mentally make, and a stablecoin is a good, I think, intermediary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very, very much, our view, which is, you have, these sort of digital commodity money, non-sovereign digital commodity money, and we'll continue to see the monetary base of that grow. And over a very long period of time, right, I think it ultimately can be a stable unit of account in a lot of ways. And then you have these existing widely accepted units of account that, and also kind of relatively speaking, price stable and obviously in the existing world of commercial contracts and other things are super useful, but I think they're quite complementary, actually.
Totally.
I know there are people who are like, we're trying to end the dollar or whatever. I think these are complementary, and even in the existing historical, fiat money systems, right? Obviously, they were dollar to gold pegged or whatever it was, and there was always that interplay between the kind of commodity money and a domain specific kind of unit of account. We'll see exactly how it evolves, but there seems like there's going to continue to be that kind of interplay over time.
Even if Bitcoin does win and that's all we use, it's going to be probably you and I might not be alive by then.
Yeah, I remember actually, and I was having this conversation with someone else, in the period of time when there's a lot of, ideological debate about, the block size debate time in the history of Bitcoin, and sort of Bitcoin core very focused on, preserving this kind of store of value. It doesn't need to be this high transaction volume thing. It doesn't need to have all these other bells and whistles or whatever, but it's like keep that focus. And it felt like, there was a real thesis that, that is a worthy pursuit, and it might be 30 years or 50 years or something until you get to a monetary base where you would have it as a really, compelling day-to-day unit of account. I don't know what that time frame is. Things happen fast on the internet. Who knows, right? But
I hope to see it before before the end of our lives.
Well,
but it could take a while.
Life extension,
Oh, you're into life extension stuff too.
We'll see.
I'm getting cryopreserved when I die.
Right.
Frozen when I die, which Hal Finney did that.
I'm very aware. Absolutely. Yeah. There's some fascinating things around that. But I think there is that interplay, and again, like, having these financial primitives, native to the underlying infrastructure and security and other of Bitcoin is very compelling. And so we're seeing, projects like TBD from Block,
the decentralized exchange,
right? Trying to do decentralized exchange that can in fact be Bitcoin native, and kind of creating a DEX model that works that way. If that can be realized, that would be quite a significant piece of infrastructure for a lot of other things as well. And I think if you listen to the Block team talk, right, there's this huge interest in how stablecoins can interact with that, and stablecoins can interact with Bitcoin, and I think there's something very powerful possible there.
Totally. Well, that's cool. You guys are talking. I didn't know that you guys were jamming with them on DEXs, because I think everyone's watching.
I'm just looking at the public work that they're doing, and they're publishing more and more in GitHub, and I think plugging away, making progress.
I think Square has such an incredible focus on Bitcoin. What I've learned in my experience in 10 years in the crypto space is that there's this reflexivity with narratives and building. And since there's tokens, or Bitcoin is a token, there's this reflexivity with it. As the price goes higher, people become aware of it, and then they buy in anticipation of it going higher. It's actually almost verbatim of what Satoshi said before Bitcoin is worth a penny. He hypothesized that this would be the organic viral loop that would pull more and more people in. And so there's this interplay between a story and price and usage. It's all intertwined. And that's where I think Bitcoin DeFi with TBD, Stacks, Lightning.
Yeah.
Lightning was one of the first ones to really get, I think, a lot of narrative and story around it. that then got developer interest, that then built applications to go satisfy that demand in the market, that then got funded by VCs.
Yeah.
And so I think Bitcoin DeFi will have this reflexivity, whereas more and more projects resemble what we've been talking about, or we see USDC come to Bitcoin, we see maybe a DEX begin. These narratives start to become reflexive, and there'll be more and more money poured in and more developer interest. So I think I don't really see a negative situation with this occurring where Bitcoin itself doesn't change, which is great. We want it to be unchanging. We don't want to add any bells or whistles that might cause that rocket to explode. But all this developer interest could bring a lot of that DeFi interest and the rest of the crypto space back to Bitcoin, which I think would be super interesting to see.
Yeah, it's also fascinating to see how, you've never had a situation, certainly in the financial system, where end users in the financial system are so passionate and care so much about fundamental philosophical ideas, core principles. I think, in some ways, some of those things are embedded deeply in society, cash is king, that's a phrase that people understand or whatnot. If you go to around the world, the sort of bearer asset money is sort of, people very intuitively understand that is different than, someone writing you a check or whatever the metaphor is, right? And it's interesting, just tied to this theme of if some of these Bitcoin DeFi primitives get built, that this really broad base of people, users, right, will say, I want to use that because I understand philosophically that that's, safer in some way, or that's, preserves the underlying kind of decentralization, and that's important to me. And so it's this interesting mix of kind of utility and philosophy that's happening that comes down to the user level, and you don't see that in a lot of sectors.
We don't see someone down the street shouting, check out the US dollar, it's a great mechanism.
Right.
And most people don't know how they're monetary.
Or people pondering what is my Venmo balance, and what is that really, whose liability is that?
Or how does Venmo work? They just press buttons and
So it's interesting. And then obviously solving the UX problem and making these application layer things really work more. I know that's something you're passionate about too. Yeah.
Of course. I think if we froze all of the tech currently in crypto, we could spend the next 30 years just building better user interfaces.
Yeah.
The usability of crypto is horrible.
It reminds me of, I was early days of the internet, and reminds me of, the kind of dial-up internet phase and what that was, and, all the stuff you could figure in your computer and things you needed to know. And it was just
this one comes with a little bit more consequences.
Yeah.
You could lose all your money.
Versus losing email or
exactly.
whatever. Yeah.
I do think there's a lot of, I know that Square is building their own hardware wallet that's focused on usability. Ledger, of course, they're one of the largest hardware wallets out there. Yeah. They've got some cool stuff in the pipeline that they told me about. For me, it's always a passion of or in coin joins, by the way, join market. There's someone that's called Jam. This group is building an interface that makes it usable, because right now it's command line.
Right.
Which if it's command line, people aren't going to use it. Yeah. Or maybe part of it's command line and there is a GUI.
Yeah. You need to have optionality.
Right. Yeah. There's this, people forget that BIP39, the 12 to 24 word backup, that didn't exist until 2014.
Yeah. Right.
And before, back then you'd have, when you printed out your private key.
Oh yeah, no, I found some money on some of those.
Oh, nice. I think every old Bitcoiner goes through in the bull run.
Oh yeah,
you go through everything. Dig through your old files to go see your wallet DAT file.
Do that.
I actually had that happen. So I was going through my old my old files, and I found a wallet DAT file.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right. And then I'm like, okay, there's no way I remember the password, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, let me try some old ones I used to use. Because this was a really old wallet.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really smart with my security back then.
Yeah.
So I tried and it works. I'm like, oh shit, I got access to it. and it's a zero balance. And then I look at the transaction log and there's like 100 Bitcoin, 100 Bitcoin, 100 Bitcoin. And I'm like, oh man, I was buying like alpaca socks and shit. And I'm like, oh, there's just like pain.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think we're just back on this theme of building on Bitcoin and Bitcoin DeFi and a lot of these primitives. We really are getting to a new place, and be excited to see where your work takes you as you think about this more too.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what you guys do. I think stablecoins, outside of like Bitcoin's core store value use case, stablecoins are a huge use case in the space.
Yeah.
So really excited to see where you guys plug in the Bitcoin DeFi ecosystem. And I'll be having some more public announcements around things that I'm working on in the Bitcoin DeFi space. So for those watching, you might have already heard about that, or you might be hearing about it. But I think there's a lot of cool things to be built. And that's going to be my focus over the next couple of years.
Awesome. Can't wait to see it all, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy.